Welcome back. I want to start this episode by giving a heartfelt thank you to you for being here. I recently posted over on the Instagram page for the podcast just about how slow things can be when you're being guided by your soul, and I really appreciate your patience and support and enthusiasm when I do share shows with you. It's been quite interesting for me in that way because the first two seasons had a year apart and there was a lot of judgment and I guess criticism that I was putting all this pressure on myself, which is something that I really want to speak to in today's episode. We'll get to that in a moment. But I just want to begin by acknowledging you and thanking you for being here. It really is something that I see, like a podcast is something that I see being built one conversation at a time, and it's not a conversation unless there's a listener. And so thank you for listening. It really means a lot to me, whether you're listening on Spotify or one of the other streaming services, or whether you're listening and watching along on YouTube. It's really powerful. And I'm very glad that you're here. So thank you. Today's show is just going to be with me, yours truly, and I'm going to be answering a question that I see coming up in the work that I do, in the way that I live my life, and I'm going to be sharing some of my personal experiences here, my observations, and maybe ending with a question as well. So we're going to free flow and see how it goes. And my intention for this show is to have deep and meaningful conversations, and for me they always take place from a state of openness. So I invite you now to make yourself as comfortable as you can be with whatever you're doing, and to let this conversation move through your ears, but through your body, so that it's not just information being consumed as the cockatiel flies past, screeching at me, if you can hear that. I love Australia. But not information that you just consume with your brain, but that it moves through the intelligence of your body. Okay, let's start with a question. What would it feel like if you could be in flow with your emotions? Being in flow with emotions can feel terrifying. I think that we glorify them so much, at least in the industry that I work with, within the feminine embodiment realm. Being in flow with emotions is the thing that we want, and we do. But I want to acknowledge how scary that can be. In the deepest, darkest emotion, of course, grief and the pit of rage that we can feel, that can feel scary to some people, but also feeling alive with passion and desire and just being open with whatever end of the spectrum of emotion. Being open can feel scary, and it can feel really scary because there's a cocktail of chemicals that are rushing through your system. And I want to look back on my life to tell this story. It won't be a story with a start, middle, and finish, but more like an observation. And so this first phase of my life during my school years, like from, adolescence, mostly high school really, and at the peak of my athleticism, because I used to play basketball quite vigorously and at a high level, I can see how I was really playing the game in my life of I follow the rules that have been given to me. And at this time in my life, I didn't really have the words or the understanding to describe what I was feeling. But around the age of like 19, 20 was when this sensation really started to build. And there was like, I can only define it as pressure building up in my system. Like I was too big for the body I was in, that my skin felt really tight. And because I was following the rules, every part of me, my brain was like trying to resist this thing. And I think that's resistance was what created the pressure to continually build. And like, I know as a child, I was quite emotional. But, you just think that's normal as a kid, like kids have emotions or whatever. But then, you get to 7, 8 years old and you start going into school, that sort of thing starts to, quote unquote, subside because, you're being socialized in a different way. But I think the resistance was really building a lot for me then. 16, when my sexuality came online really strongly. But then again, like I said, 19, 20 years old, this pressure, this huge pressure in my body just was building up. And even now, at the age of 35, like I can still feel this pressure from time to time. And I can resist it unknowingly. But I don't see that as a bad thing anymore. No, I'll get more into that as we go through this episode. Because I know now that this pressure often is a precursor to some sort of imminent expansion. And like my younger self, like the resistance really came in fear of what it would mean if I followed the feeling, in honoring the feeling. Like, what would that mean? And it was like around the age 19, 20 that the phase from following the rules started to get a bit blurry, and I really entered my hedonistic phase. Because I think I've talked about it in other spaces before, but like I really had felt like a chameleon for a lot of my life, and we can talk about that coming from a trauma background, which, I don't really want to go into in this episode. Like this survival that I needed to do it to fit in. And yes, that's true. But there's also there's a true part of my nature that is always evolving and trying and changing and exploring. And when I look back on my life, I no longer feel that shame around that part of my nature. So during this hedonistic phase, I was breaking loose. I was studying art. I started smoking cigarettes, chain smoking cigarettes. I was at nightclubs, no sleep. And it was in this phase that I was really gravitating towards experimenting with substances. I know it's not the most original experience, but I think that everyone who goes through something like this may be able to relate to what I'm about to say. But it was really during that time that I just felt so free, that the pressure just got to be released. I felt so free. I felt free from all the conditions and the goddamn rules that had been placed on me, the conditioning. I felt free from the ideas of who I was and who I had to be. And in that synthetic chemical cocktail haze, I felt at last my true size, like my true nature. Like all of me could be there without it being wrong. When these drugs were in my system, I felt like I could finally be me, the version of me that'd been pushed down to like the bottom of my being, like far, far away from any version of reality that I was subscribing to at that point in my life. Mind you, like while this was happening, I was also still, I don't know how, dating my first ever boyfriend, who was really doing his best, let's say, to hold on to the version of me that he met when I was 16. Like that's the version of me that he loved. And like I tried my best because that's what I thought you did. Like I thought that you just tried your best to work it out in relationships. But it, I think, attributed to a lot of the pressure that I was feeling because my natural proclivity, my essence is transformative and evolving and is constantly seeking new and different experiences of myself through different things in life. And so when it came to this point, he really couldn't let me go, and I didn't have the skills either to communicate what was really going on, and so I just behaved very fucking badly. Very badly. And made mistakes. But again, as this conversation goes, you're going to understand a little bit more about that as well. So, finally feeling like I could access who I really was, that I could access my range of emotion and sensation, and the expansive nature of realizing that in these altered states, chemically altered states, was really profound for me. And I think it was because I could feel and say and move as the truth of what was occurring for me in that moment. I think a lot of the pressure that I felt was because I had to keep that part of me locked away, subconsciously, but locked away. Because now at 35, I can see that, my longing to live life with an open heart and following the truth with every single part of me without hiding is who I am. And so this hedonistic phase was the first time I really got to touch that. And, I really feel the truth in it. And I made a lot of mistakes at the time, and hurt people and hurt myself and maybe wasn't taking care of myself. But that was the first time I really touched my essence. Don't worry, I'm not condoning taking copious amounts of drugs and that whole lifestyle. I'm not suggesting that you go out and do that. It's not an endorsement at all. But I'd be lying if I said drugs weren't one of my first teachers on opening and experiencing the depth of the feminine and my emotional range and the range of the feminine. It was like a lightning bolt of experience and connection to that. And I do believe it really set me on the path of following that thread. And at the time, I clearly didn't know that. It was only really in the last, 5 years or so that I got clear on it finally. But what's beautiful to see is that this part's always been there. And I'm really grateful for the experience. I'm grateful for all the fuck ups and the poor choices that came with it. Because at the core of it, I got to touch my soul's essence and my calling. And my soul waited patiently for me to catch up to that moment. To get there with all parts of me. And it's funny because what I've learned really is that most of the time my soul is waiting for me, and it's disguised in what the world would call a mistake or something wrong. You know, I'll continue with this from that time, but even like recently, the things that I've been through truly have felt like mistakes and glorious fuck ups, and yet there my soul was calling me forward in the way that she does. And I'm willing to bet that your soul does the same thing for you, but we get so fucking caught up in the rightness, in the rules of how that should be. And on how following our soul should look, like, according to who? Like, I talk about following soul often. It's deeply woven into the work that I do, through the archetypal rites of passage, through embodiment, through the feminine. Like, it's definitely there, but there's a big piece around like doing it right and correctly and healthily and all these things. And like, they're great, they're words that we use through no fault of our own, because our brains are designed to like compartmentalize and understand and break things down and weave them all back together. But like, the further I go on my journey, the more that I see how perfect everything really is. Because you don't have to be good for your soul to call you. You don't have to get everything right. You don't have to follow the rules that you've been given by the world. Like, the times I said fuck it and just went for things, in the mistake, and like jumped in, opened worlds for me. And these invitations called forth things that I couldn't see, emotions I couldn't touch, without the other parts of me I didn't know were running the show. And like, it's perfect. And as time has passed, I've really been able to access these things. And like, that's what time does. You can't see things always in the moment. Like, it's not true for everyone to know things in the now, to respond and to life in the moment. Some people need time to wait. And that's like my truth. That's how it's been for me. So like, as time's passed, I've been able, to see things as they are. And, it doesn't always require things to be detrimental, that things come crashing down, but like, that's also part of life. Like, trying to control everything, to do it in a certain way, like, that's also what I know about the feminine, is that she can't be controlled. And it's not saying you're not responsible for your life. Like, I'm responsible for my life and all the choices that I made. And that's also a reason why I think it's all perfect, because how can it be wrong? How can it be ultimately wrong if the game you're playing is to be fully self-expressed, and at first seeing all the ways that you aren't, and then all the ways that you are, and the humanity that comes with that? Like, it's a right mess. And so like, I really felt called today to share this like little part of my life, this phase of my life that doesn't get any airtime now, because, of how I present myself in the world. But I wouldn't be me without her. I wouldn't be me at all. And the other reason I wanted to share this too is like, in my industry and like wellness and like self-development, you know, I kind of fit under that umbrella. And like then there's the feminine embodiment realm as well. I see these like subtle messages that underpin everything. It's like that there's something fundamentally flawed or wrong, or that there's some mistake to clean up and fix. And while there will be mess as part of living our life, that's just fact. Just like there's carbon dioxide that we breathe out in order to respire, to live. Like there are things that we perceive, or the things that we perceive as bad or as trauma or as mistakes or fractures, are the ways that our soul calls us into our wholeness. Into wholeness in that moment. Like you don't have to go looking for wholeness. It's whole. It's as exactly as it needs to be. And it's in our humanity that we truly know our spirit. Like if you're not letting yourself, like I know for me, when I wasn't letting myself feel everything and that pressure is building up and up and up and up, like it's rejecting part of my human experience. And I want to really I want this conversation, this episode to really be about celebrating the perfection of humanity, of our shadows, of my addictions, of the so-called mistakes. And even though I'm in a new phase in my life, like I'm once again meeting my relationship to rules. It's a never-ending game. It's a never-ending game, because no matter how far you travel, no matter how deep you go in your journey, like no matter how much work you think you're doing or you transform, like every single part moves with us. The part of me that, you know, wants to follow the rules or be a good girl or get things right or be a perfectionist. The extractive parts, like whatever, like it all moves with us. And what truly transforms is our relationship to these parts. Like how I get to respond now to when I see these parts coming up is very, very different than what it was in my hedonistic phase. But just because you're in the healing work, which, you know, I'll just pause there for a moment. It doesn't mean you eradicate these parts. You just relate to them very differently. So when I come face to face with the part of me that needs to be good or play by the rules or even find the rules to uphold, like I know I'm just looking for safety. And when I think about that time in my life, like I just wanted it to be safe. But when I was following the rules and trying to do everything right, it created this pressure in me because I felt like it came at a cost. Like I had to sacrifice who I was to fit into that model of safety around me that was given to me or prescribed to me by my family, by my school, by my friends, by the culture at large on multiple levels. And it felt too much, way too much. Yeah. And this often comes up in the form of overthinking for me. So I'm going to share about my experience of that. It might come up, probably does come up very differently for other people, but this pattern comes up in overthinking. And I get caught up in the tornado of thoughts, spinning round and round and round and round so fast that I don't even realize my feet have even come off the ground. And it's funny because like I do think deeply. And so I'd get really defensive when people are like, are you overthinking, Adrianna? And I would just be like, no, I'm not. So when you have to defend something, you know, it's got some hooks in you. I feel like you need to defend it. It's not really part of you, but perhaps it's pointing to something that it's protecting. And what's often required from me in those moments where I'm in this tornado is to find a way that works for me to give myself space to feel the fear that's underneath it. that's causing the tornado. It's so fucking sneaky sometimes. Jeez. That's just the nature of it though. Like, we can be victimized by it being sneaky. We can try our best to be ahead of the curve and like see it coming, but we never do because we're human. And it's part of the game. It's just the nature of it. But we can practice, obviously, becoming better or well equipped at identifying it. But I also think about how quickly children can make up a story or apply meaning to a perceived fracture or a moment of abandonment. And this is exactly the same part that's operating in me as an adult. So I can either be victimized by the fact that I've been swept up in this tornado again, or I can meet the part of me that this tornado is trying to protect. I want to go back to the sensation of pressure I described at the beginning, because it's a lot like the sensation I get in overthinking. Sure, we can label it as thoughts, but when I bring it into my body and how the action or behavior really feels, it's like my skin is getting tight, that I'm too big for my body. And it's not just in my head, it's like a full body experience of pressure, because the overthinking is this protection mechanism for the deeper emotion that I've subconsciously pushed right down, because part of my brain, my psyche, has labeled it as a threat. And rightly so. Like, after all, the emotion was something I wasn't allowed to express before, and if and when I did express it, it caused some sort of separation, abandonment, or rejection. And as a human being, these things are all like, we all want to avoid them at all costs because they fucking hurt. They hurt. And that's okay. And like, the drugs, the sex, the relationships, the food, the shopping, you name it, we try and avoid it because we don't want to feel that hurt. I think these small fractures, are the true suffering that's part of our inherent nature. I think like a lot of like spiritual teachings, they talk about like suffering as part of the human experience, and we all seem to think that like these are like big things that we endure and suffer, and we do endure really hard things, really big hard things. But I think we overlook the small infractions like this all of the time. And that hurt, that fear of being hurt that we all experience as humans, like it's like right there all the time. But the truth is, like, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm starting to see it as a way that my soul is calling me back. Yet the message, the call is like so subtle that our systems can't detect it all the time. And for those who are so sensitive, like really sensitive, like they need to numb it, and they don't have the tools to meet that. And so like there's a lot of compassion that I have, and like I feel the warmth of tears coming behind my eyes now as I say this, because like all of these things, the suffering, the fear of being hurt, and when I understand like what part of me, what part of human beings like feel that even well into adulthood, like it's such a tender spot. And like, how can we not love these opportunities? I didn't always. There's a lot of judgment I've had around, oh fuck this thing again, I thought I was, like there's a lot of critiquing and judgment that I've had to meet and still have to meet sometimes. And that adds to the pain sometimes too, but like it's very much something that each time I encounter now, there's like a new level of approval and love for that just wasn't there before. I mean, we can spend time talking at length about why we didn't have these things, these tools growing up, or didn't have the role models that we needed. And trust me, I have spent a phase of time here. But what I've come to understand is the only thing that's changed this for me is being willing, I should say, brave enough to turn towards the part of myself that is calling for me in that moment and meet it. And I have cultivated tools along my journey that have allowed me to do that, and all of the different roles and identities I've taken on in my life to find ways of doing this is like, it's like an encyclopedia of ways. But nothing changes unless you actually take the action of turning towards. Nothing. And more often than not, it's way more simple than our brain would like it to be, because the more our brain makes it complex, the longer it gets to put it off. The longer it gets to be in victim. Again, nothing wrong with that, but an observation. An observation. Because, like, I think there's just a natural thing that happens, because when we turn towards it, there's so many variables and unknown factors there. And I can tell you now, like, it will be messy, it will hurt, and it will expand you. When you open up to the emotions that have been stagnant or frozen, it will feel scary. Nothing changes that part. Maybe in time it becomes exhilarating or even addictive for some people, which I've witnessed. But what I know to be true at this state, or assuming this posture of openness to emotion, is a mirror for the way we meet the feminine aspect of ourselves, whether you're a man or a woman. Like, it will always be a mirror, the way we meet our emotions, of how we meet the feminine. And the feminine is life. It's life. I've said it before, and it feels worth mentioning again, that our emotional body is connected to our sexual body. However, in the industry that I work within like the feminine embodiment world, like I see a lot of emphasis on the sexual connection to the feminine. And trust me when I say this, I don't like saying it, but it's what I see. There's a lot of emotionally constipated women proclaiming their connection to the feminine is about sex and sexuality. Like, so much of the trauma we hold is in the emotional body, in the tissues of the body. And sexual trauma is like the act, and of course it impacts sexuality, but the blockage is in the emotional body. It's in the tissues of the body, the unprocessed emotion. And when you start to clear out the emotional body, the sexual energy feels clear and open and can flow. Now, this is very basic. I'm not saying that's how it is. Like, it's very nuanced, but like, this is the essence of what I see. And like, through the Eastern lens of the chakra system, within the sacral plexus exists the element of water and fire. And like, it's predominantly water, because when you look at the solar plexus through the same philosophy, same lens, that's when the fire really emerges. It begins as an ember and then emerges through and out, through relating to other. And this alone, like, to me, highlights the emotional exploration and embodiment and possibility for growth and maturity when it comes to our relationship with the feminine. Like, the relationship we have with our emotions. And, you know, a lot of my intimate relationships have been predicated on sex, I'll be honest. But most of what they've revealed to me is my relationship with my emotional realm and the feminine. And maybe it was my addictive nature, maybe it was my soul calling me to go deeper in the way that it does. But it's also why my work at its core is about the approval of emotion. And I've got many ways that we can get to that place depending on the woman I'm working with. But in essence, I want to highlight something now, that emotions don't have a story. It's when we think, oh, it's our feelings. When we start talking about emotion, it's like a raw experience. There are no words that can be put on it. It's short, it's potent as fuck, and it just like moves. When I say short, like the emotion is like 90 seconds long. When you are open to feeling it, it's all it lasts. Feelings, on the other hand, have stories attached to them, and they're no longer simply experienced in the body. They move and are experienced in the mind or the ego, and they go on and on and on and on. Been there like me? Is that resonating for anyone else? But they do. They are experienced differently. Yes, they have a physical impact on the body, of course, but the two are very different. When emotions are free to move through the body, they give access to flow, to the feminine, and to the infinite expressions that she holds, that we hold in our human form. And like, this to me is why they're so connected to spirit. It's so powerful. And speaking of flow, like what I've come to notice too is that, excuse me, it's not about being in perfect flow all the time. Like this idea of perfection flow and how it like relates to what I see around the feminine and sexuality versus like the embodiment of emotion as a gateway, as the foundation of the feminine experience for all beings, is that there's like this idea of perfect flow isn't at all connected to the truth of feminine flow. It's like the reality that we live in I hate using this word now, but like the patriarchal terms of like a linear form. Like flow isn't this linear thing that we have to idolize and keep going with and like stay in the flow and get into a flow state. Like, can we just like pause and talk about that for a moment? Because the part of me that finds safety in following the rules was really humbled by the wisdom of the feminine cycle when I first came upon it. Like it really humbled me. And it still does. Because flow, the reality is flow doesn't always look the same. I've experienced flow in stillness and in the dark of winter. I've experienced flow in the energetic bursts and rapture of spring and like just like, wow, look at all this new life. I've experienced flow in the hot, dynamic nature of summer, and I've experienced flow in the waters and cleansing forms that come, cleansing expressions, I should say, that come with autumn. Like it's all flow, babe. Saying it to myself. But our culture's rules and like these homogenized regulations have you thinking it's not flow. And like I think that's what can be really confronting for people about emotion. And so in this way, this opening and flowing with emotion, with the feminine, can be terrifying in a world that doesn't acknowledge the truth of life. The way it ebbs and flows. It's all still flow. It looks like it's ebbing, but babe, it's flowing. It just takes on different expressions. And I'll put my hand up and say, like, I bang my head against this internally and externally all the time. It's human. Like, I'm not sitting here with the answers. I'm sitting here as a human being sharing my experience of this because I don't see enough of that. I don't see enough of that. But I want to touch on something important here for a moment to wrap up this episode. And it's around the idea of flow. What it can feel like to be in flow. And it comes at the paradoxical side of that because we have choices in this reality. We can either stay stuck, apathetic in the system that perpetuates the sensation of pressure, which is the role of the victim, or we could become someone who needs the rules and needs to implement and uphold the rules, which is still a form of pressure, but now you're just the perpetrator or the villain. And you can be that in yourself. It doesn't need to be about someone else. Or you can demonize the system and fight against it, which also creates a false sense of pressure, but we think it's working to do something about the problem, which in essence is still operating inside the system from another role, and that's the rescuer. You know, like the drama triangle, victim consciousness, is a beautiful lens to look through. Beautiful, beautiful lens. But you can sort of see, at least in that example, and I love, it's a fun game. It's a fun game to play. To shift from villain to perpetrator to hero or the rescuer. Like, it's fun sometimes to do that. And it's only fun when you know it's a game. And it's only fun when you know there's another perspective, which means that you can get off of that triangle and start playing a different game. A way that invites you to embody your expression and your unique way of being in flow with truth. Because that, at the end of the day, is what the emotions are all about. About truth. How willing are you to be with what is true? Not from the level of your mind. Not from the rules and the constructs that have been prescribed to you. No. So, I mean, I'll probably go deeper in following episodes if this resonates with you. Like, I'll leave a comment. There might be a little, trying to think of the word, poll at the end of the episode that you can vote on if you're on Spotify. Participate. Participate is my invitation to you. What resonated? What sparked something in you? And, you know, being in what it means to be in flow with our emotions is, you know, if you ask me again when I'm 45 or 55, I'm probably going to say something different. But for today, this is what came out when I asked that question and what it felt true to share with you. And it was really enjoyable to do that today. So I'm really grateful again. Start with gratitude, end with that. Thank you for being here with me. And I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Be well.